For some time, I've been concerned about the language we should use in order to describe what's happening in Gaza, and I've spoken to it on so many occasions. And I think we're getting to a point, an inflection point, whereby we need to see this for really what it is, and that is the power of the Jewish lobby, one aspect only of the Jewish lobby, because there are other groups within the Jewish community who are at odds with a specific thread or trend within the Jewish lobby, and particularly one group that has a lot of power and a lot of influence. And that power and that influence is connected directly with Israel. So any criticism of Israel will mean that you will be automatically labelled as anti-Semitic. Now, we've had this discussion over and over again, a bit tired of it, quite frankly, but what it does mean is that we need to continue to escalate the discussion. Because if we don't, and if we remain silent about this, and if we tend to come under the mirage of being labelled anti-Semitic just because we object to a genocide in Gaza and we're concerned about the slaughter of tens of thousands of innocent people, well, sorry, can't do that anymore. Need to call it out for what it is. I'm not anti-Semitic. I am anti-death. I'm anti-killing anyone, particularly, obviously, defenceless individuals, which is what's happening in Gaza. And I've posted heaps of times about Sky News and their attitude towards this. It's as if the number of people that were dying in Gaza just didn't exist. There's never a conversation about it, and I don't understand where they're. Well, I guess one way of putting it is they have moral ineptitude, in my view. So, but I was interested today to hear that Bob Carr came out and gave a speech, or he was interviewed, and he talked about his experience of a certain aspect of the Jewish lobby and the impact that they have. And then I noticed on TikTok, which I got through X, was an interview with Peter Stellick, who is a Jewish person, who is a philosopher, and he came out with some really interesting things to say about all of this. And so I wanted to play for you what they said, because it's important to understand that on one hand we've got a politician who is well regarded, who has a certain view around all of this, and holding the same view is this academic. And it's important to know that some people are coming out and saying what needs to be said. They are not anti-Semitic, but they are talking about the power of a particular aspect of the Jewish lobby, and we need to take note of what they're saying, because what they're saying is really, really important. So we'll start with Bob, and then we'll go to Peter at the end of what Bob has to say.
I think Australians should be concerned. I have said, I'm on the record saying that the Israel lobby, the Israel Jewish lobby, I think is more accurate because that's the term AJAC uses. The Israel Jewish lobby in Australia is a foreign influence operation. It's designed to put the interests of Israel above the interests of Australia and its foreign policy. And no one else has an operation as well funded. No other country has an operation with offices in every Australian capital city. No one else organises donations to attempt to elevate its influence in the way the Jewish lobby does in Australia. Now, this is simply a fact of life. What Kevin Rudd said to me about this, the reference he made to it, about money being raised. Tony Burke, in one of the cabinet exchanges, said that in just about every discussion he'd had of how we vote on Israel and Palestine, someone had made reference to the importance of campaign donations as a consideration in this. And the model for the Jewish lobby is what happens in the United States. If any member of Congress or the Senate expresses a view critical of Israel, sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, you can guarantee that someone will be funded by supporters of Israel to run against them in the next primary. Now, I remember years ago I had a meeting with someone from the Jewish lobby in Washington who just spelt this out. He spelt out to a group of us, considered to be supporters of Israel, as we were at the time, that this is how they operate. Oh, it's a distortion of democracy because instead of considering our foreign policy priorities and interests, we're swayed to take account of the desires of the Jewish community. And they're very explicit that they will ask if there's the smallest departure, they will immediately seek a meeting with the Prime Minister.
Now, we need to make a stand against all of this, and we need to find a way to encourage, enthusiastically I need to add, our politicians to make a stand about what's happening in Gaza. Now, Albanese did that to some extent by recognising Palestine, but as we know, Netanyahu's come out and said, well, that was the wrong thing to do because that is anti-Semitic. So they used this, and they used the Holocaust as a wedge between what they're doing and this notion around anti-Semitism. So, and then next there is Peter. Now this guy is a philosopher, and he's Jewish. So let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I'm Peter Slezak. I'm an Australian academic, teach philosophy. I'm Jewish.
Tell me about the shock that this country is feeling in the wake of this anti-Semitic attack that occurred at Bondi Beach.
Well, it's the worst terrorist atrocity we've ever experienced, so there's no question about that. Of course, the Jewish community are traumatized.
Bibi Netanyahu has blamed the anti-Semitic attack on Australia's recognition of a Palestinian state, saying that the Australian Prime Minister Albanese has poured fuel on the anti-Semitism fire.
Recognizing Palestine was the right thing to do, and in fact it was long overdue. How on earth can that be connected to two mass murderers who commit an atrocity? But it tells you a lot about how Israel and the government there are trying to drive this narrative. My parents were Holocaust survivors. My mother and grandmother survived Auschwitz. My mother described coming into Auschwitz on the train in the cattle truck. Part of her family immediately went straight to the gas chambers. I grew up with my mother's stories, and I choke up sometimes trying to tell those stories. The Palestinians weren't to blame for the Holocaust. They shouldn't have paid the price, and they've been paying it ever since. To put it bluntly, the Holocaust has been exploited by Israel to justify its crimes against the Palestinians. Silence is not an option when there's crimes being committed in your name.
You also attended the massive march across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Explain what that was like, what that moment was like.
It was inspiring. It was a moving event to see so many people came out, like 300,000 people maybe. It was huge. I don't think there's ever been one like that in the whole history of this country. But of course, the Zionists have tried to portray this as a Jew hate fest. It's bullshit. In Australia, as a result of what happened here in Bondi Beach, they're now trying to clamp down on all demonstrations of support for Palestine. They want to say, in fact, they're trying to even legislate formally that any criticism of Israel is necessarily anti-Semitic. Well, it just isn't, because there's plenty of reason to be critical of Israel. We in Australia manufacture some parts of the F-35 jets that are bombing Gaza. And I think of when Desmond Tutu said, in a case of injustice, to be neutral or to be silent is to side with the oppressor.
I've heard before the saying that Palestine is the great litmus test of our time. I'm American. As a U.S. taxpayer, my money is directly funding the bombs that are being dropped on refugee camps, hospitals. If we live in countries that are directly funding this genocide, it's up to all of us to speak out about it, right?
That's exactly right. We have our cultural origins and connections, but we also have to transcend those as a human being and see our common humanity. And I think that's our responsibility.
So silence is not an option. And therefore, we need to take control of the narrative, I think, and start talking about the issues that do matter, which is the genocide, which is the fact that we can criticise Israel but not be anti-Semitic. I'd like to know what you think about all of this, so let me know in the comment section below, and please subscribe to my channel because it doesn't cost you anything. Thanks, everyone.